Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Idaho's public school budget is in crisis, but one group is trying to look beyond today's shortfall and present a vision of what Idaho's educational system could be. Find out what that vision is and if you agree, and we'll take your calls. Stay tuned. Dialogue is next. Hello, I'm Joan Cartan-Hansen. Thank you for joining us here on Idaho Public Television, on the World Wide Web, and on public radio stations. Idaho Superintendent of Public Instruction Tom Luna presented the public school budget to the Joint Finance and Appropriations Committee Thursday. He called for more than $25 million in cuts in targeted areas and the possibility of an additional 3.74% across-the-board cut of other public school line items. He says cutting any more could undermine recent gains in student achievement.
That will give districts more flexibility. Despite the difficulties we face financially, I am confident we can continue to build upon this progress now and in the future to ensure we continue to meet the needs of all Idaho students. We know we have to continue to move forward, and we have to continue to improve education. The question is, how do we accomplish this? First, we cannot hunker down and wait for better times. We cannot tell a third grader who is struggling today in math that you have to wait till the economy improves before we can get you the assistance you need. We cannot tell a fourth grader who is struggling in reading that you're going to have to wait till the economy improves. We cannot tell a student who is advanced and needs more and greater opportunity to meet their full potential that they're going to have to wait for the economy to improve before we can get them the advanced opportunities they need.
While legislators and educators are dealing with the current fiscal crisis, who's looking out for the long term? What do we really want our educational system to do? What are our goals? That's the question the Idaho Educational Alliance is trying to answer. Founded in 2007, the Educational Alliance of Idaho is made up of representatives from business, the Idaho Education Association, the Idaho School Administrators Association, the Idaho PTA, and a number of state agencies and other stakeholders. Governor Butch Otter called on the Alliance to develop recommendations for Idaho's future educational system. The Alliance has released its first round of goals, and joining me now to explain what those goals are three Alliance members. Business people Skip Oppenheimer and Bob Locken. I'll get both of those names out. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
And also joining us is Jamie McMillan, the Executive Director of the J.A. and Catherine Albertson Foundation, also a member of the Alliance. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. And of course, we want to hear from you. Give us a call, toll free, at 1-800-973-9800. Skip, why don't we start with explaining what is the Educational Alliance of Idaho? How did it come together?
Well, the basic idea kind of surrounds the concept of going back, as you said, 2007. Was there some value, and was it possible to bring together some of the key stakeholders in education around the table to see if we could agree on at least some fundamental ideas in terms of strategic direction and a vision and a mission? The Idaho Business Coalition on Education Excellence had been formed about 7 or 8 years ago, and one of the underlying principles of that organization was, and ultimately that's become about 75 CEOs, presidents, was what we wanted to try to do was be a piece to hopefully helping the quality of education's development in the state. And what we didn't want to be was yet another group of 75 CEOs or presidents who had 75 great ideas but no idea of what we were talking about. And so we decided what we'd do is really work closely with those people in the education arena that do this for a living and see if we could be supportive and constructive in the process. So one of the things that came out of the early stages of that was there are an awful lot of silos in education in this state, and probably in every state. And that inhibits, we felt, the potential of collaboration, of communication, of better efficiencies, ultimately better outcomes. So we, along with some of the other stakeholders, came together and said, is there a way to create a stakeholder group that ultimately became the Alliance that could help develop a vision and a mission and some common goals, strategic goals over the longer term we could continue to work on together. And the governor was very supportive of that, and a variety of the other stakeholders were very supportive of that. And that's what ultimately has led to the Alliance and to these initial set of strategic goals that we have presented to the governor, a month or so ago.
Bob, how did you come together with and we'll go through the recommendations, kind of at least a snapshot of some of them, but how did you decide what to focus on?
You know, that was the challenging process. What Skip outlined is bringing the key stakeholders of the state together to the same table. One of the things we found in the business community when we did that is that actually had never been done before. So I think everybody understands that there are multiple pieces to the education system, and if we're going to make substantial transformative change over the long haul to have the education meet the needs of our economy and our employers so that our children have the ability to create a livelihood and a standard of living for themselves, that we needed everybody to work together. And so when it was started, it was surprising to us that these stakeholder groups had actually never sat around the same table and had a discussion about what they actually agreed on and what the common mission and goals are. And so it was a new process, and it took a lot of hard work and getting people together and trying to keep the group fairly small so that we could actually have some conversation and get to know what the different perspectives are on the table, and really try to focus on what we could agree on. I think just through natural course of events, people, what they disagree about tends to come to the surface, whether you want it to or not. And it takes a lot of work to get people to focus on what we agree on, because it turns out we all agree on quite a bit. And we're not going to make any progress unless we find that common ground that we can work from.
And why did the Albertsons Foundation want to get involved?
Well, it was a great opportunity for us, Joan, as somebody that obviously has a vested interest in education in Idaho, and because we have the opportunity to work outside the system and sometimes look into the system from outside. And so we're also very dedicated to making a measurable improvement in Idaho education. And so along with that mission comes a tremendous amount of research and research-based decision-making when it comes to developing our own internal initiatives. So what we felt we had to offer to the Educational Alliance was really some research background and some history, because what we wanted these, ultimately the starting point of these recommendations to be, was really data-driven, credible recommendations. And I think that's why we had such success in getting a diverse group of stakeholders to unanimously support these recommendations, is because they were data-driven. They're not really focused on individual agendas. They really come from solid recommendations that have been proven to work in other states. We looked at that we called model states that were really successful and shared a lot of similarities, a lot of strengths, and some of the challenges that Idaho has. And we were able to take some of the things that they did and look at them for our implementation in our own state.
Let's go ahead and take a quick look at the first wave of recommendation. It was under the goal of transparent accountability. It's that first one, statewide implementation of student longitudinal data systems. You're hoping by 2012. What do you mean by student longitudinal data systems?
Student longitudinal data system is a big word, basically, for a consistent way of keeping tabs on student performance. And that should really stay with a child from the second they enter into the system. And that way, no matter where that child goes to school, their set of data and their performance, the needs that they need to be addressed, travel with them, so that if they were to transfer schools, or if they were to go on from their elementary school to a middle school, that all their data goes with them. And it really has been shown to dramatically improve teachers' ability to better deliver education to these students, because they have some historical background.
Because the ISAT test compares one classroom to next year's classroom, as opposed to
Sure, it's
tracking
teachers really don't have students for that long. You know,
Right.
in reality, they have their students for 8 to 9 months, and they're gone. So the intent is that they can get a little bit of knowledge about that student. And also, we're one of 3 states at the moment that are lacking a longitudinal student data system, because it's the critical piece to really make informed decisions about policies, about programs, about education initiatives. Instead of guessing if they were successful and they made a difference, you can really go back and see and make more data-driven decisions when it comes to education.
And the other ones on this under this kind of broad goal are a little bit more apparent. Broadband connectivity to every public school, develop a professional development plan, and establish a teacher compensation plan that's based on performance. So that you have this kind of goal, hoping most of them looking at 2012. Are your time frames, considering the economy, still on track, or how is the current economy affecting the big picture, the long-term picture?
Well, I think the membership of the Alliance is committed to making a difference and making these changes. You know, the budget situation is a relatively new development. We've been working on this for several years. At this point, I don't think we've, as an alliance, come together about what all the short-term budget ramifications are. I think it's really it's going to be a challenge, and a challenge I think everybody in the Alliance is up for. We think that these goals are mission critical to the future of our education system and the future of the state's economy. So, you know, at this point in time, I don't see us probably making these changes. It's more of a, let's focus with the resources we do have. Once the budget discussions are over, let's focus the resources we do have on making the best progress we can.
I think, Joan, just to build on that, the Alliance members, when we first sat down, said, why is this, you know, how many of these blue ribbon committees, how many of these kinds of things have we all seen over the years? And there's been a lot. And they seem to last for a brief period of time and make their recommendations and then sort of vaporize into thin air. And just building on what Bob was saying, one of the things that we all ultimately came to as fundamentally important to this idea was not just an initial set of recommendations, not just a vision, a mission, and then a set of 4 strategic goals, but a commitment to continue to develop those over the longer term, knowing there are going to be some very tough times, and obviously this is one of the toughest, and make it a dynamic process. This is a beginning set of goals, and I think the group feels there's continuing opportunity here to make these goals not only come to reality over time, but to add goals over time and to add strategies to this and kind of develop the fabric. And I think that's maybe one of the fundamental, hopefully opportunistic things for the state and for the group.
Okay, let me go ahead and get our first caller in here. Glenn in Chalice. Glenn, go ahead.
Yeah, this question is for Skip. This thing for the No Child Left Behind, is this thing going to still be in for the education even though it's going through changing times?
Okay, thank you.
Well, No Child Left Behind, when you look at some of the goals of No Child Left Behind in some of the conversations we've had in the Alliance, and they've been, I'd say, more on the informal side rather than sort of formal, the question that I think came out of some of the No Child Left Behind ideas was, on the positive side, it did set a bar that kind of elevated people's thinkings and potentially elevated the sort of policies and procedures to try to get states moving in that direction. The negative is that it set a sort of a one-size-fits-all set of standards. This group, I think, has gravitated more towards a little more individualistic by student developmental model. And when we talk about things like longitudinal student data, in a very individualized way, how do we track where a student is at the end of a year compared to where that student was at the beginning of the year, and try to measure the progress by individual student rather than one sort of static set of standards that everybody attains to. So I think there's some difference, some nuance, but I think the idea of continuing to improve the quality of the educational experience for students is why, I mean, that's ultimately why we're doing this.
Let me go through the second kind of wave of goals under the high standards bar. Idaho being among the top 20 states in regards to the rigor and relevance of its math and science requirements. End of course exams in math and science statewide, consistent statewide, and increase the availability of highly qualified teachers, which was of course part of the No Child Left Behind, increasing those number of highly qualified teachers. Why make that, why improve the rigor, especially of math and science?
Yeah, I mean, I'm an executive in high tech, and I've spent my career in high tech, and that probably gives me a particular view into why math and science are so critical. You know, it was recently quoted that high tech in the state right now is 18% of our economy. So it's already bigger than a lot of our traditional industries that we grew up with in this state. But more importantly, or as importantly as 18% of the economy, is if you roll the clock back 25 to 30 years, it was zero. So it's not only a large part of our state's economy, it's a very substantial growing piece of the economy rather than a contracting piece of the economy. And if you look forward into the information age, that trend's going to continue. Technology is key to biosciences, it's key to agricultural sciences, it's key to information technology, it's a key to most of the new jobs that the economy will be creating over the next 10, 15, 20 years. Most of those jobs we don't even know what they are yet. Right. But the vast majority of them require a significant level of critical thinking, a significant amount of math and science background to prepare yourself for the technical training that you would need after high school, or for a baccalaureate sort of degree after high school that you need to get into those jobs. So that particular part of the curriculum is really, we think, very, very critical to the future of our economy.
The next kind of was under post-secondary credit in high school that looked at high school credits. High school students can graduate with up to 30 college credits, and then access to AP, dual enrollment, and equivalent coursework. That's actually, that one is fairly soon. You're looking at that perhaps 2011. Why start that idea of making sure we're thinking in the school system not K through 12, but P through 20?
Mm-hmm. I think a simple answer to that is really that high school just isn't enough anymore, and that we want to engage Idaho citizens as learners as soon as possible and keep them learning as long as possible, and that's really going to be what results in a better quality of life for everyone in our state. In terms of more access to dual credit and AP courses, access to those type of programs has repeatedly shown that it dramatically increases a student's success when they in fact transition on or go on to some type of post-secondary training, because they've had some of that, they've tasted success in a college level course in high school. Maybe they didn't consider themselves college material, but now they do, and some schools are even taking it to the next level where students are actually graduating with a significant amount of college credit, in the long run saving themselves and their families quite a bit of money.
Which appeals to me.
Right.
As a parent, that appeals to me.
But
and then,
John, kind of tied to that point, in Idaho, when you look at the number of kids who go on, or students who go on to any form of post-secondary ed, when we were working, all of us, on this community college initiative that ultimately became the College of Western Idaho, if you take 100 ninth graders in the state of Idaho, the state does pretty well in graduation rates. 80 some, I think it's 85 approximately graduate from high school. But out of that 100 ninth graders, only about 32 go on to any form of post-secondary ed, and only 12 to 14 graduate from any form of post-secondary ed. So to Bob and Jamie's point, I mean, if we're going to be competitive, if our kids are going to have jobs, and we don't do a better job of somehow getting more kids going on to some form of post-secondary ed, we're not going to be competitive in the world, and the students aren't going to ultimately have employment. And I think it's obviously a national issue. I mean, we used to, 20 years ago, the country was first in graduates from post-secondary educational institutions. That doesn't mean colleges and universities, that can mean community colleges. Today we're 12th in the world in terms of people graduating, and a lot of the other countries have gained a lot through the community college, vocational, not necessarily four-year universities, but through other forms of post-secondary ed. But we think in the Alliance fields, and the last two goals here really tie to the idea, how do we get more kids to go on to some form of post-secondary ed? That's going to be fundamentally important to the future of them and this state.
Yeah, it's not just important to high-tech companies like mine. If you look at healthcare, if you look at all of the parts of the economy that are growing and emerging, whether they're technology or not, they all require some form of schooling after high school. So I think we need to get better at getting Idaho's children ready for that, and we need to have better participation and better completion of those, because those are the workers of the future. And if we don't have those people ready to take those jobs, then those jobs will go someplace else.
Mm-hmm. Let's quickly go over the last kind of round of recommendations. Idaho standards and curricula aligned to post-secondary expectation. At least 60% of high school students registered as full or part-time post-secondary students within 1 year of graduation, and at least 50% of Idaho's citizens 25 years of age or older obtain a post-secondary degree of some sort. Mm-hmm. And so we're looking at beyond just those normal college years. It's looking as adults continuing education on throughout our whole lives. Mm-hmm. Is that part of what public school should be?
I mean, answering from the foundation's point of view, I would say yes. I mean, we really owe it to all of our citizens to provide educational opportunities. And if we don't start addressing some attention to our adult learners, we're really never going to get caught up to where we need to be globally competitive or even nationally competitive. And I think the key to that is starting to promote all kinds of opportunities for continued learning. It's not just about college in a traditional four-year sense. It's really about promoting awareness and creating more opportunities for other types of learning that are really realistic for non-traditional students and adult learners, like online curriculum and courses and community colleges, distance learning, apprenticeships, professional technical training. Those are all options that dramatically increase wages, earnings, quality of life, and not only that, but the probability of your children's chances for going on to school are really dictated by a parent's history of post-secondary.
So if it's important to me as a parent, it's going to be important to my child.
Usually.
You know, I think the current economic situation probably couldn't be a better illustration of the necessity of this particular initiative, because a lot of the, there's a lot of people whose jobs have been displaced. I think it's fairly reasonable to expect that if those people make their way back, as they make their way back into the workforce, a lot of them are not going to make their way back into the workforce with the same job they had when they were displaced. They're going to retrain, and they're going to have to get a new skill set and go into a profession that it's a growth profession in order to find employment. So if you don't have access to those sort of continual education things, you just strand a lot of people.
Let's go to Carla in Meridian. Carla, go ahead.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for taking my call. I was thinking about the fact that oftentimes we're saying we want to base our schools on a business model, and I'm very concerned about that, because in business you can hire and fire people based on their work and what their output is, but in a school we take every single child who comes to our door, whether they work or not, whether they have the qualifications to do the work, and so basing teachers' pay on that is a concern to me.
I think what's important to understand about the Alliance is the Alliance, the Business Coalition was instrumental in helping form the Alliance, but the rest of the Alliance members are the key stakeholders in education. So this is not a business coalition, right? This is a group of stakeholders in education, and we're not necessarily, as the business community, implementing our ideas on education. We recognize that our expertise comes in running businesses, not in running the education system. We're just trying to be a catalyst to help people come to a common understanding what our common goals are and what potential we can achieve if we work together.
Well, and I think to that point, that as an example, the IEA has been, I would say, when you look at all the stakeholders around the table, they have been vitally important to this process. And they bring, to the caller's point, ultimately, what happens in that classroom is why we're really all there. What happens to that student in terms of that student's experience, that ultimately the most profoundly important aspect of that is the teacher. And I feel, at least personally, have learned a lot from the IEA's position and the other stakeholders in terms of how you design a system that allows teachers to really teach well and still have some way of measuring performance. And this idea of a single measurement, I don't think is necessarily the answer that anybody on this alliance is saying would even make sense. Maybe there's some multidisciplinary way that could make some sense. That's all, I think, to be developed. But I think the group, it's amazing what happens when you get a bunch of smart people around the table, and I've just personally, and I think most of us have been very impressed just with the quality of the discussion. And I think to the caller's point, if you take one point of view, which might be a business point of view or any of the single stakeholders' points of view, you lose a lot if you don't get that collaborative effort. And I think that's maybe the most important element of this process, hopefully.
We had an email question, also a Facebook question along the lines of from Eldon wanting to know, has the Alliance meetings been open or closed to the public, and can the public be invited to submit testimony to the Alliance? How do you bring the public in as a stakeholder?
Well, that's a really good point, because I think one of the things that makes the Education Alliance a unique model is the fact that we've really based our structure on a continuous improvement model. And the fact that this initial set of recommendations is a starting point, it's a roadmap, and that I think we'd like nothing more than to get feedback on it and to consider some of the things that aren't addressed in the first set of recommendations. And that it really is based upon a model that isn't supposed to go and sit on a shelf and get dusty, but really be a living, breathing document that is responding to the needs in our state.
I think how exactly we're going to address membership and ongoing feedback is something we're still developing. I mean, when we first brought the parties together, the initial goalpost was simply, can we agree on anything? And quite frankly, it's just within the last several months that we've gotten to find that we can agree on these very key mission, vision, strategic goals for the organization. So now, as an alliance, we're trying to get together and figure out, okay, if now that we've got that done, how do we become a persistent voice for education in the state? And so our operating procedures and how we work going forward are things that we're still working on, because although we've been working on this for a couple of years, the idea that we're going to be a persistent organization that actually has a common point of view on this and will be around to get people to work together as a sustaining organization is relatively new. So.
We're almost out of time, and the big question that kind of hangs in my mind is that how do you make it happen? You're not elected officials. You don't control the budget. How do you convince the people who do actually push the button and spend the money that this is what they should spend the money on?
Real quickly, I think that if there is a secret sauce, so to speak, it is in getting a bunch of smart people who care about the future of our children in the same room and working that dialogue to the point of what are the things that we agree on that we can get done. And I think that's what we can do, is we can get the people together to have a dialogue about the common points of interest and how do we focus on those.
You've got 5 seconds. Anything you want to add?
No, I would agree, and I think you got to start with where can we agree strategically on some goals, and then how do we build from there? And I think that's where the group's at today.
Well, thank you. I'm afraid we've run out of time. Of course, if you want to learn more about what's going on at the legislature, you can check out Idaho Reports. If you want to learn more about the Educational Alliance of Idaho, you can go to the Dialogue website at idahoptv.org. Check it out. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time on Dialogue.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. To order a copy of this program from Idaho Public Television, call our toll-free number or visit us on the World Wide Web.